Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified. In the next 45 minutes, we are going to run through today's newspaper, The Hindu Delhi edition, dated 27 September 2020. We shall pick up important articles and discuss them from civil service examination perspective. The articles that we shall take up for discussion has been tabulated on your screen and the time stamping for the same has been given in the description section. Before you attempt DNS, take this self-assessment speed test. This will give you a fair idea as to what you know and what you do not know so that you pay more attention and grab the knowledge as it comes while you take the DNS. Next on your screen will appear the answer to the test. You evaluate yourself and retake the test after the DNS. There is an article on page number 12 in the FAQ section, Farm Bills, Who Gains and Who Loses. You must be aware that farmers are protesting in many states and many parts of the country against the three bills on agriculture market reform that were recently passed in the parliament. Opposition parties and the farmer groups have raised concern that these legislations can cause corporatization of agriculture. Corporatization of agriculture in itself is nothing wrong. But the fear is that that will lead to destruction of current mandi network and will lead to loss of state revenue. And because of destruction of mandi network, the MSP regime will also go. Because MSP is given only on goods that are procured by the government in the mandis. And if there are no mandis, then there will be no MSP. Government has reiterated that the MSP system will stay. But we'll try and understand in this discussion that despite the assurance given by the Prime Minister himself that the government will never scrap MSP system, why the protest still continues. Government has passed three bills. The Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Bill 2020 allows trade to happen outside APMC mandis without paying any state taxes or fees. See, there is a confusion presently all over whether the farmer can sell his produce outside AP mandis or not. And I must tell you, there is no restriction on farmers selling his produce outside the APMC mandis. The restriction is on traders. In the states where there are APMC mandi system, there the traders cannot trade outside the APMC mandi. But if a farmer chooses to individually sell to someone, he is free to do that. But now the trade can happen anywhere, and that too without paying any tax to the state government. The second bill is the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance and Farm Service Bill 2020. This bill will facilitate contract farming and direct marketing. But there is a concern regarding this bill that dispute resolution has not been clearly mentioned in the bill. And it appears that the courts will be kept out of the dispute resolution and dispute resolution will be largely dealt by bureaucrats. There's a third bill, Essential Commodities Amendment Bill 2020. This deregulates the production, storage and movement and sale of several major foodstuffs, including cereals, pulses, edible oils, onions, except in case of extraordinary circumstances. This is a logical extension of contract farming measure that the government is seeking to take. To materialize contract farming and to increase private investment, production, storage and movement have to be deregulated. But the fear is that this will pave the way for large corporate houses to enter into agriculture sector, and if the storage can be unlimited, they will buy all the crops and latter, creating artificial scarcity, they can sell at elevated price. Actually, there are many concerns revolving around these three bills. Let's look at them in a logical manner. The first and foremost issue that you must understand from the examination perspective is the constitutional issue. Agriculture falls in the state list, and hence many argue that the center should not make legislation on this subject at all, as this will compromise the state's ability to tax and regulate the agriculture sector. See, the agriculture trade that happens in the mandi are taxed, and there are some mandi fees that the traders have to pay. This vary from 8.5% in Punjab to 1% in some other states. In fact, Punjab and Rajasthan were considering legal measures to expand the bounds of APMC mandis, meaning it will not only be in the mandis, but agriculture trade happening anywhere in the state will be taxed. So the right of the state to collect revenue from the agriculture trade will be impinged upon, because the bill that will soon become the act after the presidential assent does not allow for any tax or any fee to be collected by the state government in case of transaction happening outside the mandi. Also, the dispute resolution mechanism has not been spelled out in detail in the bill. The chance that a small farmer will be able to stand up against corporate is very, very bleak. So essentially, the big corporates will be acting without any regulation in the state government. They don't have to give any tax to the state government, and they will not be operating under the supervision of the state government. That will impinge on the constitutional right of the states. The second issue is regarding the destruction of APMC mandi system and the commission agents network. Some farmer organizations are of the opinion that the commission agent network system are not all that bad. They do help in facilitating the procurement system. They do help in connecting most of the villages to the notified markets. Wanted a reform in that system and not the system to be removed altogether. Additionally, there is a very important fine line in the bill. The transaction that will happen in the private mandis outside the APMC mandi will be tax-free. So obviously that will be cheaper to trade. That will essentially imply that the transaction in the APMC mandis will decrease or may become nil. So the government procurement will decrease, and so will be the minimum support price given to the farmers. And over the period of time, if APMC mandis are gone, then the farmers will be left at the mercy of private corporates. So that is why, even though the government is saying that the APMC system will remain, the farmers fear that the new law will actually essentially make it useless. So the demand is that make minimum support price universal, meaning whether the transaction will happen in APMC mandi or outside, everywhere procurement cannot happen below the minimum support price. But such an assurance has not come, such a provision is not there in the bill. You must be aware of this data, you must be reading in newspaper, it was mentioned by Economic Survey, it was also mentioned by Shanta Kumar Committee that only 6% of farmers actually sell their crops at MSP rates. And government procure only wheat, paddy and very few crops in bulk in MSP procurement. However, the story is very different in Punjab and Haryana, because almost half of the government procurement has come from the state of Punjab and Haryana. More than 85% of wheat and paddy in Punjab and 75% in Haryana is bought by the government at MSP. Farmers of these two states have immensely benefited from the MSP system. And that is why you would see that the protests are centered around these two states. Although the protests are coming from other parts of the country as well, but the large-scale protests have been organized by the farmers of Punjab and Haryana. If we look at states like Chhattisgarh and Odisha, then there the percentage of rice or wheat procured at MSP by the government is very less. However, in the last 5 years, that was increasing because of the decentralized procurement mechanism developed by these two states. So farmers of these states also have some genuine fear that their newly assured income are at stake. Then there is always a fear of big giants coming into the agriculture sector. Because even though MSP procurement happens only for 6% of farmers' crop, and many of the states like Bihar, Kerala, Manipur do not have APMC system at all. But still, the private buyers are currently dominated by small traders. And this essentially was because of the stock limit. But now when the stock limit has been removed, there will definitely be corporatization of agriculture space. And that will no doubt bring much needed investment in the agriculture sector. But there is a question of level playing field. And what chance do the small farmers have in bargaining with the big giants in the agriculture sector? So these are the major issues that you must be aware of regarding the three bills that are going to become an act. There is an article on page number 1, Address Aspiration of Tamil People, Modi urges Rajapaksa, Mahinda Rajapaksa, the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. There is another article on page number 12, a party for the Rajapakshas, referring to Mahinda Rajapaksa, the Prime Minister, and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the President of Sri Lanka. Both are brothers. We will combine both these articles and have a holistic discussion touching upon important aspects for the mains examination. In the DNS dated 6th of September 2020, we have discussed the issue already, touching upon various things. For instance, we have understood the history of Tamil Sinhalese conflict in Sri Lanka, the seed of which was sown by the Britishers. When Britishers were ruling Sri Lanka, they brought many Tamil people to Sri Lanka for the purpose of plantation. Britishers, adopting their policy of divide and rule, gave preference to Tamil people in government job. This caused dissatisfaction and anger among the Sinhalese population of Sri Lanka. Once the independence was given, Sinhalese people took the frustration on Tamils. And instead of being magnanimous, because they were 90% of population, they started to take on minority. They started to sideline Tamil population. And they made Sinhalese language compulsory for government jobs. And step by step, they marginalized Tamil people in all possible ways. Because of this came the demand for separate Tamil state in Sri Lanka, and this led to the formation of LTTE, Liberation Tigers for Tamil Eelam. Eelam means a state. This led to a brutal clash in Sri Lanka among communities between army and LTTE. Paramilitary forces carried out many butchering and many killing. Because of the havoc being created in Sri Lanka, Indian government got alarmed. A, because Sri Lanka was a neighborhood, and problem of this scale can cause refugee influx into our nation. B, being a responsible power in the neighborhood, India had to take major steps to restore peace in the region. And C, we had substantial Tamil population in our own country, and ripples of that can be felt in India as well. So the Rajiv Gandhi government decided to directly intervene in Sri Lanka through army, and this cost the Prime Minister his life. But because of the pressure, Sri Lankan government got into India-Sri Lanka Accord of 1987, which formed the basis of 13th Constitutional Amendment, which granted power to provincial councils. See, Sri Lanka has unitary form of government. The central government was very powerful and the local bodies was for the namesake. Between the central government and local bodies, there was creation of provincial councils, similar to the state governments. And provincial councils were to be given important subjects like education, land, police. This will ensure that powers come into the hands of Tamil people as well. Although they are around 13 to 14% of the population of Sri Lanka, but in certain regions like the northern and eastern coast, they are in substantial percentage. So there the Tamil people can have a sort of self-rule. But this was not accepted both to LTTE or to hardliner Sinhalese leadership. LTTE thought it was too less because they were fighting for Tamil Eelam, a Tamil state, and power devolution of this scale was considered too less. And anyhow, no power of land and police was given to provincial councils ever. And the hardliners among the Sinhalese leadership alleged that this will weaken the unity of the nation. So 13th Amendment have never been completely implemented in Sri Lanka, and this question is still there, and Indian government still take up this issue of 13th Amendment in every bilateral meeting with Sri Lankan leadership. This was also taken up yesterday by Prime Minister Modi during his meeting with the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa, through video conferencing. One important reason why 13th Amendment have not been implemented is the form of government which is there in Sri Lanka, which is semi-presidential. We discussed the semi-presidential form of government in Sri Lanka in quite detail, which we will do again today but concisely. Then in that DNS, we also discussed some general important issue in the present relationship between India and Sri Lanka. This was the summary of the previous DNS related to the issue. But we will take up some issues again because it's important. Why? Because in the syllabus of GS paper 2, there's a topic mentioned, comparison of Indian constitutional scheme with other countries. And question on this has not come in the recent time. In my opinion, it becomes a very important topic for the coming mains examination because this issue of 19th Amendment and 20th Amendment have been making round in news for quite some time. And 19th Amendment and 20th Amendment basically tells us about the constitutional scheme of Sri Lanka. So it's a very important topic that can be potentially asked from this section of the syllabus. Additionally, in the GS paper 2 under international relation, There is a topic, effects of policies and politics of developed and developing country on India's interest and Indian diaspora. Sri Lanka being in India's neighborhood and having many Indian Tamil diaspora, the issue becomes very important. So we'll begin with the constitutional scheme of Sri Lanka. We'll see the power relation between Prime Minister and President. We will see the form of government which is semi-presidential. Then we'll move on to understand what is the issue of 20th constitutional amendment that Sri Lanka is bringing to nullify 19th constitutional amendment. Then we will see again the issue of 13th constitutional amendment and the recent issue of constituting a committee to look into the possibility of a new constitution of Sri Lanka altogether. And that for India is a bigger concern than 20th constitutional amendment. Okay, to begin with, Sri Lanka has a semi-presidential system. In semi-presidential system, there is both president and prime minister, unlike the presidential government where there is only president. So in that sense, it is like parliamentary system of government, but unlike parliamentary system of government, president has genuine executive authority. And that is why he is popularly elected. In parliamentary form of government, the head of the state, president, is not popularly elected. In presidential form, of course, the president is popularly elected. But in presidential form, there is no legislative responsibility, meaning the government do not have to enjoy the confidence of legislatures, the lower house, in Indian case, the Lok Sabha. But in parliamentary form of government, there is legislative responsibility. And in that sense, semi-presidential form of government has this feature of parliamentary form of government, and semi-presidential form of government also has legislative responsibility. Meaning, if a no confidence motion is passed in the parliament, the government will fall. But the thing is that president himself is an active executive authority, not just the nominal head. So president himself actually can run some ministries. So even if the government has fallen, still there is continuity. And president can run the business of government unless next prime minister is elected. That is why government does not depend on the legislative majority. And this feature is similar to the presidential form of government. Because in parliamentary form of government, essentially government will depend upon legislative majority. So the advantage of semi-presidential form of government is the continuity in the government. Government falls, but totally it does not fall because president can continue to run the business of government. So in countries where there is problem of unstable government, unstable coalition, they adopt semi-presidential form of government like France. But the problem is that both president and prime minister have real executive authority. And whenever there are two power centers, obviously there is chance of tussle. And especially when president and prime minister are from different political party. What is happening in the 20th constitutional amendment in Sri Lanka is to increase the power of president and make prime minister a ceremonial head of government. The reason why they are able to do it and enjoy public support, because it was there in their manifesto as well, is the recent history of Sri Lanka where there were too much tussle between president and prime minister and the government could not function well. So this semi-presidential form of government is one reason why Mahinda Rajapaksa has swung back to power and is now doing away with the power of Prime Minister. Although not very important from civil service exam perspective because it's their internal matter, still I'll take you through the timeline of the reign of Mahinda Rajapaksa, his fall, then the 19th constitutional amendment, his rise again, and now the 20th constitutional amendment. Because this will help us to understand the issue holistically and have a better feel about the topic. Mahinda Rajapaksa is a seasoned politician of Sri Lanka. And the Rajapaksa family has been ruling Sri Lanka for a long time. Mahinda Rajapaksa was elected for the first time to the parliament in 1970s. From 2002 to 2004, he was the leader of opposition. He was the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka from 2004 to 2005. And from 2005 to 2015, he was the president twice. But he was defeated in his bid to become president for the third time when Maithripala Sirisena formed an alliance with a cabinet minister of Mahinda Rajapaksa, Ranil Wickremesinghe. Ranil Wickremesinghe was also a powerful politician with stronghold and many loyal MPs. So in 2015, Maithripala Sirisena became the president and Ranil Wickremesinghe became prime minister. What effectively happened was Mahendra Rajapaksa was out of power. I'll tell you one very crucial thing. LTTE was wiped off in 2009. And during the presidency of Mahendra Rajapaksa, many alleged war crime was committed. The present president of Sri Lanka, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, brother of Mahendra Rajapaksa, was the defense secretary. This is the reason why Tamil population of Sri Lanka is nervous and they do not have confidence in the present leadership. And that is why more than before, India is taking up the issue of 13th constitutional amendment. This alliance of Maithripala Sirisena and Ranil Wickremesinghe came to power on the plank of constitutional reform. They took up the issue of politicization of institutions, nepotism, corruption, and because of all these, they came up with 19th constitutional amendment which crippled the power of president. We'll look into the provision of 19th constitutional amendment and 20th constitutional amendment in a while, but the 19th constitutional amendment was basically aimed to cut down the power of president, cut down arbitrariness, devolving more power into the hands of the parliament and making the institutions of the country more independent. Once Mahinda Rajapaksa was out from the office of president, he tried his luck with the office of prime minister. In 2015, the parliamentary elections happened after the election of president. But Mahinda Rajapaksa party did not have the number in the parliament, so he could not become the prime minister, but he became an MP though. Once parliamentary election was over and Ranil Wickremesinghe was declared as the prime minister, the 19th constitutional amendment was done in 2016. And the MPs from the party of Rajapaksa voted for this constitutional amendment. And without their support, two-thirds majority could not be achieved and 19th constitutional amendment would not have materialized. The MPs from Rajapaksa party were also fed up because of the strong hold of the family. So after 19th constitutional amendment was done, Rajapaksa floated a new party and in this he was helped by his brother Basil Rajapaksa, who is a kind of a strategist. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, another brother of Mahinda Rajapaksa, also played immense role in strengthening the party that was conceptualized by Basil Rajapaksa. The party name was Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, which translated into English means Sri Lanka's People's Front. SLPP. SLPP did very well with the majority Sinhala Buddhist community in Sri Lanka. And in the local elections, they had remarkable performance. But their chance to come to power at center was not very clear. However, in 2018, things started to take turn in the politics of Sri Lanka. The relation between the president and prime minister was very strained. The issue was basically taking up the projects of India or China. The president and the prime minister were not on the same boat regarding the project of Chinese government, whether they should be given precedence over the projects of Indian government. This became very bitter in 2018 and President Maithripala Sirisena sacked the Prime Minister Wickremesinghe and shockingly appointed Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa as the Prime Minister. Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa was Prime Minister for 52 days, but Supreme Court struck down this decision of President and Mr. Wickremesinghe was reinstated as the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. During this episode, nations saw how this is creating difficulty when there are two power centers. And in the next presidential election, Mr. Rajapaksa's party will highlight this and will list it down in the manifesto that when they will come to power, they will increase the power of the president. But however, still the chance of Mr. Rajapaksa to come to the center in the next presidential election was not clear because many of his supporters was displeased as to why he took up the job of Prime Minister by removing Mr. Wickremesinghe. Mr. Rajapaksa was seen to be choosing expedience over the law. Then the incident of Easter terror attack happened and that flipped the politics of Sri Lanka. This incident was seen to be caused by security lapse and security lapse was seen to be caused by rivalry between the president and prime minister. Because there was a breakdown in governance, security lapse was happening and the country was becoming prone to terrorist attack. So Mahinda Rajapaksa party gave a promise of a strong leader And this, when coupled with provocative nationalistic rhetoric, they had the advantage. This did the trick for them. But there's a catch. The catch is that the 19th constitutional amendment barred a president to contest for the third time. Mahendra Rajapaksa was already president twice. Now he could not contest election in 2019 again. So his brother Gotabaya Rajapaksa contested election and marginally he won. Mr. Mahendra Rajapaksa had to wait for the parliamentary election, and in the parliamentary election they had a clean sweep. Now one of the brother was the president and the other was the prime minister. And the president brother ordered for the 20th constitutional amendment bill to be placed in the parliament. This bill seeks to make the executive presidency even more stronger than it was before the 19th constitutional amendment and make the prime minister a ceremonial position. The allegation is that this is done to make the Rajapaksa family to rule Sri Lanka easily. Now, in very brief, I'll tell you what the 20th constitutional amendment seeks to do. Because it is an internal matter of Sri Lanka, they can do any constitutional amendment they wish. So it will never be asked to give the detailed provision of the constitutional amendment in the civil service exam. But you have to know the gist of it as to what 20th constitutional amendment seeks to do, which is to increase the power of the president and make the prime minister a ceremonial head. And then you must understand the implication of that vis-a-vis India. Very briefly, let me just tell you, you just hear me out and have a little bit of idea. 20th constitutional amendment will make the president immune from all legal proceedings. The 19th constitutional amendment made it possible for citizens to file fundamental rights application against the president. Meaning if president is violating their fundamental right, they can go to the court. 19th constitutional amendment established constitutional councils and they had member from the parliament and member from public as well. And these constitutional council approve the nominee of the president for important constitutional posts. For example, Chief Justice and other judges of Supreme Court. The president and judge of the Court of Appeal, the member of Judicial Commission, Attorney General, and so on and so forth. But now the 20th constitutional amendment will make the Constitutional Council to comprise only members of parliament and not members from the public. And more importantly, the president will seek only observations from the council. And the council as such will not approve the nominee of the president. The power of nomination will lie squarely in the hand of the president. The 19th constitutional amendment also established parliamentary council to approve the nomination for election commissions, national police commissions and other commissions. And again in the case of parliamentary council, the president will seek only observations. President will have no obligation to consider those observations. The 19th constitutional amendment made the president to seek the advice of the prime minister in the matters of appointment of ministers to portfolios. And the advice of the prime minister would be binding. But now the president will take the advice only if he deems necessary. 19th constitutional amendment barred the president to assign certain ministry to himself. But now there is no such limitation. By 19th constitutional amendment, president cannot remove prime minister. But now president can unilaterally remove the minister, including the prime minister. By the provision of 19th constitutional amendment, president can dissolve parliament only after 4.5 years of its first meeting. But now the president can dissolve parliament anytime after 1 year from the date of general election. So the power balance will now tilt in the favor of the president. President is going to have an immense power now. And all the key constraints on presidential executive power will be essentially removed by the 20th constitutional amendment. That is why the political analysts in India are closely scrutinizing the reason behind the government quickly setting up an expert committee to draft an entirely new constitution. Because president will now be all powerful, the only thing that explains the formation of the expert committee to draft an entirely new constitution is to do away with the provisions of 13th constitutional amendment that called for formation of provincial councils and bestowing them with power to enable them to work as an institution of self-governance. And if that is what Sri Lanka is going to do, then that will have serious implication in the bilateral relationship. Because touching on the 1987 bilateral accord will not bode well with India. India has not commented on the 20th constitutional amendment of Sri Lanka because that is essentially an internal matter of the country. But since 13th constitutional amendment is related to the bilateral relation based on the 1987 bilateral accord, diluting its provision will definitely call for a reaction from India. Now we have come to 13th constitutional amendment, the provision of which you have to know for the exam. It was an outcome of Indo-Sri Lanka Accord signed in 1987. It was done on the initiative of Rajiv Gandhi government. It mandated a measure of power devolution to the provincial councils established to govern the island's 9 provinces. Previously, Sri Lankan government was a unitary government, and still it is, because the power devolution to provincial councils have not happened. The idea was to devolve power to all the 9 provinces, including the Sinhala majority and also the coastal regions of Tamil majority, so that institutions of self-governance can be created and the demand for a separate Tamil state can be done away with to form one unified, peaceful Sri Lanka. Subjects such as education, health, agriculture, housing, land, and police were to be devolved to the provincial administration. But because of restriction on financial powers and overriding powers of the president, the provincial administration was a non-starter. And in particular, the provisions related to land and police were never implemented. And after the 20th constitutional amendment, we might just have to forget about it. 13th constitutional amendment recognized Tamil as the second official language of Sri Lanka. And during the presidency of Maithripala Sirisena, the national anthem were also sung in Tamil language on the occasion of their national day. But under the new dispensation, it has been discontinued. Ironically, the 13th constitutional amendment was opposed both by LTTE and Sinhala nationalist parties. LTTE thought it was too less, and Sinhala nationalist parties, their leaders thought it was too much of power to give in the hands of Tamils. There is one major point here which you need to remember. Still, Sri Lankan leadership perceived the 13th constitutional amendment to be imposed by India. And the nationalist party creates rhetoric that it was done by the hegemonic influence of the neighbor. And recently, the call from the hardliners have increased to do away with the 13th constitutional amendment. But the fact of the matter is that the 13th constitutional amendment is the only constitutional provision for settlement of long pending Tamil question in Sri Lanka. It is presently the only ray of hope that the Tamils have seen after the Sri Lankan independence in 1948. So when Prime Minister Rajapaksa visited India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi reiterated that Sri Lanka needs to complete the implementation of 13th constitutional amendment. But during that visit to India, Mahendra Rajapaksa did not categorically commit to it. Rather, in one of the interviews given to The Hindu, he stated that demands of the Tamil National Alliance for the implementation of 13th amendment will not be accepted by majority Sinhala community. This issue was taken up yet again by PM Modi in yesterday's video conference meeting with the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. And this time, the statement coming from the Prime Minister Rajapaksa again did not infuse any confidence. He said that Sri Lanka will work towards realizing the expectation of all ethnic groups, including Tamils, by achieving reconciliation nurtured as per the mandate of the people and implementation of the constitutional provision. He has spoken in the parliament already that the sentiment of the majority community has to be respected. And the majority Sinhalese Buddhists do not want to share power with the Tamils. There are many arguments put forward by the hardliner leadership against the provincial councils. One of the reasons is that for a small nation, the central government can effectively manage the provinces, and as such, another tier of governance is not required. One government at the center and then the local bodies will suffice. So rather, the local bodies should be empowered rather than provincial councils. Then there is the question of sovereignty and integrity of Sri Lanka. They say that the police and land powers cannot be delegated to the provincial councils. They say it again and again that the provincial councils was forced down upon us by Indians at virtual gunpoint. So using these arguments, they are not allowing for the implementation of 13th Constitutional Amendment, and rather the rumbling is that they are trying to do away with the provision of 13th Constitutional Amendment altogether. Here I must tell you the role of leadership in the nation building. I'll give you an example of Nelson Mandela. In South Africa, the blacks faced repression from white for years, and after independence, the blacks wanted to take it out on whites. They wanted to marginalize whites. And because of this, the risk was that the nation will again reach to the boiling point. Because of the leadership of Nelson Mandela, that didn't happen. Rather, South Africa is the only country on the face of the world that does not have problem of racism, where blacks and whites are living in peace and harmony. So the head of the state cannot just say we have to work as per the mandate of the people and we have to respect the sentiment of majority. There is great role of leadership in nation building. Jawaharlal Nehru also showed leadership in taking up reforms that were otherwise opposed by the majority. For example, the Hindu Code Bill. Progression of the nation should not be left alone on the sentiment of people. There must be vision and guidance coming from leaders as well. So if the Sri Lankan government will be moving towards diluting the powers of Provincial Council, then unlike the case of 20th Amendment, New Delhi may not remain silent. But since this is still an ongoing story, you have to keep an eye as to what Sri Lanka will do and what reaction Indian government will give on that. There is a news on page number 11 with the title CAG moots probe over cess accounting dodge. See, the thing is that the center presently is levying Central Road and Infrastructure cess. Previously, it was called as Central Road cess. And we have done cess in detail in the DNS dated 24th September 2020. From that DNS discussion, we know that for every cess, there is a dedicated fund. So for Central Road cess, there was Central Road Fund. So money coming from the Central Road cess will first go to the Consolidated Fund of India, and from there, with the parliamentary approval, it will go to the Central Road Fund. This happens for every cess. First, the money go to the Consolidated Fund of India, and from there it goes to the corresponding dedicated fund. In the budget of 2018-19, the government amended the Central Road Fund Act and renamed the Central Road Fund as Central Road and Infrastructure Fund. The purpose was that the money can be used for any infrastructure in general and not only for roadways. So the money can be used for waterways, for railways, and even for social infrastructure. However, the CAG has found out that the government transferred almost about rupees 10,250 crores from the Central Road Fund to the Consolidated Fund of India rather than transferring it to the Central Road and Infrastructure Fund. Ideally, if the fund has been renamed, then the entire money should go from the previous fund to the new fund. But that money has gone into Consolidated Fund of India, and from Consolidated Fund of India, money didn't come to Central Road and Infrastructure Fund. So there are two problems here. Problem number one, in the accounting, the central government showed that money as non-tax receipt. But that was actually a cess that should go under tax receipt. Problem number two is the money collected from cess must be used for the dedicated purpose. It cannot be used otherwise. And since this amount was not transferred to Central Road and Infrastructure Fund, it remained in the Consolidated Fund of India, so the money can be used for any purpose, which violates the norm that govern the money collected from the cess. But the Finance Ministry has given an explanation that the balance in the Central Road Fund was transferred to Consolidated Fund of India with the approval of Finance Minister. And such kind of write-backs have been done in the past. But the CAG is not impressed by the explanation and is calling for a probe into the actions of cess accounting officials. For the prelims exam, I must also tell you that the administrative control of Central Road and Infrastructure Fund is under the Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. Previously, when it was named as Central Road Fund, it was under the administrative control of Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. There is another article on page number 11 with the title PSU to PSU stake sale just moves fund to government, says CAG. See, in 2018-19, the government has raised around rupees 72,000 crore through strategic sale of 4 PSUs to other PSUs. For example, Rural Electrification Corporation was taken over by Power Finance Corporation, which is also a PSU. This kind of a strategic sale of one PSU to another PSU has been criticized by CAG in the audit report. CAG has highlighted that such kind of disinvestment merely result in transfer of resource from one PSU to another PSU. And that essentially does not change the stake of the public sector in the disinvested PSU. But what happens is government shows that the target of disinvestment has been achieved. For the prelims examination, let us see a few pointers. First of all, you must be aware that disinvestment refers to the mechanism in which government loses a part of its ownership of the PSUs through the sale of shares. Disinvestment as a policy was adopted by the government post 1991 LPG reforms. And the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, previously it was called as Department of Disinvestment. This department is under the Ministry of Finance and acts as the nodal agency for disinvestment in India. Some kind of disinvestment are called as a strategic disinvestment. According to the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, in the strategic sale of a company, the transaction has two elements. The transfer of the block of shares happens to a strategic partner. This strategic partner can be a public sector or a private sector company, and that will be decided by the department. And secondly, there must be transfer of management control to the strategic partner. This is an essential component of strategic disinvestment. And the transfer of management control to a strategic partner essentially means that the strategic disinvestment takes place when government ownership in the PSU get reduced to below 51%. If the government's ownership is more than 51%, then the management definitely will lie in the hands of the government. So the management must go from the government. The idea is that the government should not be doing the management so that the company can be managed in a more professional manner to make it profitable. According to the strategic sale guideline issued by the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, after the strategic disinvestment transaction, the strategic partner may hold less percentage of share than government, but the control of management would be with the partner. For example, suppose government is holding 51% stake in a PSU and rest of the stake is well dispersed among other government units. If the government sells 25% of the stake, government still will have 26% and the strategic partner will now have 25% stake. But simultaneously, government may transfer the management to the strategic partner because government now is holding less than 51%. So even though the government now is at 26% and the private strategic partner is at 25%, but if the management of the firm is with the private strategic partner, then it will be called as a strategic disinvestment. So you must understand two things here. For a strategic disinvestment, the government ownership in the PSU must reduce to below 51%. And the management must go to the strategic partner. Now let us do question for the day. Yesterday's question was this: which among the following methods can be used by the multinational companies to reduce their tax liability through base erosion and profit sharing? Misuse of double taxation avoidance agreement, treaty shopping, round tripping. Actually, it's pretty basic and all these three methods can be used by MNCs to reduce their tax liability. So answer would be D, 1, 2 and 3. Question for today is this. Consider the following statements. 20th Constitutional Amendment in Sri Lanka seeks to reduce the provision of provincial councils created by 13th Constitutional Amendment. Second statement is 1987 bilateral accord between India and Sri Lanka is monitored by UN. Select the correct answer using the code given below. 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, none of the above. With this, we have come to the end of the discussion. I hope you had your 40 minutes worth spending here.